The afternoon arrived gently. No announcements. No rush. Just sunlight, sliding across the living room floor. It warmed the wood in soft, golden shapes, as if the house itself was breathing slowly. Somewhere in the background, a clock ticked, steady, patient. Outside, leaves stirred in the breeze, brushing against each other like a quiet conversation. It was an ordinary moment. The kind people live inside without realizing how fragile it is. She stood at the kitchen counter, rinsing a coffee mug she had forgotten about. The smell of coffee still lingered faintly. The radio played low, nothing specific, just sound filling space. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her mind was calm. Peaceful. On the rug near the window, the puppy moved. His paws were still too big for his body. His steps, a little unsure. But there was nothing careless about the way he walked. He moved slowly across the room, nose close to the floor, tail resting low but loose. Not excited. Not bored. Just focused, like he was following a quiet instruction no one else could hear. He stopped. Lowered his head. And gently picked something up. Not with urgency. Not with playfulness. Carefully. The object was small and soft, and he adjusted it in his mouth until it sat just right. Then he turned and walked across the rug, placing it down, lifting it again, as if testing the weight of it. She glanced over and smiled. "Hey," she said softly. "What VE you got there?" Her voice carried no concern. Puppies carry things. That was normal. Socks. Paper. Whatever they could find. But the puppy didn't react. He didn't run away. Didn't chew. He simply carried the object toward the center of the room. And sat. Waiting. Her smile lingered, but something about the stillness caught her attention. She dried her hands on a towel and stepped closer. The puppy lifted the object again and walked toward her, slow, deliberate, before stopping a few feet away. He looked up at her. His eyes were calm. Focused. Not playful. Her smile softened. She crouched down slightly. "What is it, buddy?" The puppy stepped forward. And gently placed the object at her feet. No bite marks. No drool. Just care. She reached for it automatically, then paused. Something about the way he sat made her hesitate. Straight-backed. Still. Like this moment mattered. The room felt quieter. She picked it up. And her breath caught. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't trash. It was fabric. Old. Faded blue. Soft at the edges. Her fingers froze. She knew this. Her thumb traced a seam she hadn't touched in years. A familiar stitch, uneven in places, handmade. The memories didn't rush. They unfolded slowly, like something waking up after a long sleep. "Oh," she whispered. Her voice barely made it out. The puppy leaned closer, pressing gently against her leg. His breathing was steady. Grounding. As if he knew the weight of what he'd brought. She sat down on the floor. The fabric rested in her hands like something fragile, something that had survived without her knowing it. The sunlight shifted, and for a moment the room glowed warmer, heavier. She hadn't seen this in so long. She thought it was gone. Lost to time. "How did you even find this?" she murmured, more to herself than to him. The puppy stayed still. Watching her. Listening. She laughed softly through her breath and shook her head. "You don't even know what this is, do you?" He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stayed close. Her chest tightened, not painfully, but deeply. The kind of feeling that reminds you how connected the past still is to the present. She pressed the fabric to her palm and closed her eyes. For a moment, she was somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere full of someone she hadn't allowed herself to miss this much. When she opened her eyes, they were damp. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed by the suddenness of it. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The puppy's tail moved once. Slow. Gentle. She placed the fabric beside her carefully, as if afraid it might disappear again. Her other hand rested on the puppy's back, warm, solid, real. She had brought him home thinking she was giving something small a safe place. Something lost. Something unsure. She hadn't expected him to return something to her. Something she didn't know she still needed. The afternoon settled back into its quiet rhythm. The clock continued ticking. The radio hummed softly. But the room wasn't the same anymore. Neither was she. She looked down at the puppy again, her voice barely above a breath. "You chose this moment, didn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Whatever guided him, whatever he sensed, it wasn't chance. And the meaning behind his gentle choice was only just beginning. The house didn't return to normal. Not really. Even after she stood up. Even after she folded the fabric carefully and placed it on the table. Something stayed in the air. A softness. A quiet awareness. The puppy followed her as she moved through the room, his steps light, unhurried. He didn't tug at her clothes. Didn't bark. He simply stayed close enough to be felt, not enough to demand attention. She noticed that. Later that evening, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the walls, she sat on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading. The puppy lay on the floor nearby, chin resting on his paws. That's when she saw it again. He stood. Walked slowly toward the hallway. Stopped. Lowered his head. And picked something up. Her breath caught, just slightly this time. She leaned forward, watching. He carried the object back into the living room with the same careful grip. No shaking. No chewing. When he reached the rug, he placed it down, adjusted it, then sat beside it. Waiting. She set the book aside. "What did you find now?" she asked gently. The puppy looked at her, then at the object. It was another piece of fabric. Different color. Different texture. But the same feeling. Her heart beat a little faster. She stood and crossed the room, moving slowly as if afraid to startle the moment. When she picked it up, recognition came again, not sharp, not overwhelming, but unmistakable. This had been stored away. Forgotten. Or so she thought. Her throat tightened. The puppy didn't move. He watched her face, her hands, like he was reading the room in his own quiet way. She sat down on the floor again, fabric in her lap, memories pressing gently at the edges of her thoughts. Once is coincidence. Twice is something else. That night, she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. The puppy slept curled up near her feet, his breathing slow and even. She stared at the ceiling. Thinking. The next morning came with pale light and the smell of toast. She moved through her routine carefully now, more aware, more observant. And the puppy seemed to sense it. He waited until she was watching. Then he moved. This time, he went toward a corner of the room she rarely paid attention to. He nudged something with his nose. A small box, pushed slightly out of place. She frowned. "Hey, what are you doing?" He pawed it once. Then twice. Then stopped and looked back at her. Waiting. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from curiosity. She knelt beside him and opened the box. Inside were things she hadn't touched in years. Folded notes. Old photographs. Small keepsakes she hadn't known she missed until they were right in front of her. Her hand trembled. The puppy sat beside her, tail resting on the floor, eyes soft. "You keep finding these," she whispered. Her voice wasn't questioning anymore. It was realizing. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Never rushed. Never chaotic. Always gentle. He didn't bring her random things. He brought her specific things. Objects tied to memories she had packed away carefully, maybe too carefully. Each time, he waited. Watched. Stayed close as emotions surfaced and settled. By evening, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by small pieces of her past. The room glowed with warm lamplight. Outside, the sky faded into soft blues and grays. She ran a hand through her hair and laughed quietly. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" The puppy leaned into her side. No answer. Just presence. She realized then it wasn't about the objects. It was about timing. He didn't bring everything at once. He didn't overwhelm her. He chose moments when she was calm, open, ready. Like he was pacing her heart. She rested her palm on his back, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath her hand. "I thought I brought you home to help you," she murmured. The puppy sighed softly and closed his eyes. The truth settled gently in her chest. This wasn't training. It wasn't mischief. It was connection. Whatever he sensed, whatever guided his small, careful choices, it was tuned to her. To what she carried inside. To what she'd been avoiding without realizing it. The night grew quieter. The house felt warmer. And for the first time since she'd brought him home, she understood something clearly. This puppy wasn't just learning her routine. He was learning her story. And he wasn't done yet. By the third day, she stopped calling it coincidence. Not out loud. Not to anyone else. But inside. Something had shifted. The house felt the same walls, same light, but she moved through it differently now. Slower. More aware. As if the puppy had tuned her attention to a frequency she hadn't been listening to before. That morning, she didn't rush. She made tea instead of coffee. Let it steep longer than usual. Watched steam rise from the mug and disappear. The puppy sat near her feet, calm, patient, his eyes following her hands. Waiting. She noticed how often he waited. Not passively. Purposefully. After breakfast, she settled onto the couch. The sunlight was softer today, filtered by clouds, turning the room a pale gold. She opened her laptop, intending to check emails, but her fingers paused above the keys. The puppy stood. She felt it before she saw it. The quiet shift of movement. The soft click of nails against the floor. He walked toward the hallway again. She didn't speak. She just watched. He stopped near the same corner as before. Sniffed once. Twice. Then nudged a small basket tucked beneath a side table. It slid forward slightly. He looked back at her. Waiting. Her heart beat a little faster. She closed the laptop. Stood. Moved toward him. "What is it?" she asked, not curious now, but careful. She knelt and pulled the basket out. Inside were things she hadn't touched since the move. Loose papers. An old notebook. A pen that no longer worked. She lifted the notebook. The cover was creased. The edges soft from use. Her name was written on the first page. In her own handwriting. She swallowed. The puppy sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth through her jeans. She opened the notebook slowly, like it might startle if she moved too fast. The pages were filled with thoughts she barely remembered writing. Lists. Small reflections. Half-finished sentences. Things she'd written during a time when words had been easier than silence. Her chest tightened. She hadn't realized she'd packed this. Or maybe she had, and forgotten on purpose. She sat back on her heels, notebook resting in her lap. The room felt still, as if holding space for a reaction. She ran her thumb along the edge of the page, breathing slowly. This is... She stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. The puppy leaned his head lightly against her knee. No pressure. No demand. Just there. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. You keep doing this. Her voice wasn't surprised anymore. It was thoughtful. She didn't put the notebook away. Instead, she sat on the floor and read. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to remember how she used to talk to herself. How honest she had been back then. How open. The puppy stayed with her the entire time. When she stood to stretch, he stood too. When she sat back down, he followed. Like he was tethered not to her movement, but to her attention. Later that afternoon, she decided to test something. Not consciously. Not deliberately. Just, instinctively. She moved an object slightly out of place. A framed photo on a shelf. One she hadn't looked at closely in years. Then she waited. The puppy wandered the room for a while. Lay down. Got up again. Then, without hurry, he walked to the shelf. Sniffed. Paused. And carefully lifted the frame with his mouth. Her breath left her in a soft rush. He carried it to the rug and placed it down. Sat beside it. Waiting. She covered her mouth with her hand. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I see you. She picked up the frame. The photo inside showed a younger version of herself. Smiling. Unaware. Standing next to someone whose absence still echoed quietly through her life. Her eyes burned. She didn't cry. Not yet. She set the frame beside the notebook and sat down on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. The puppy climbed into her lap awkwardly, carefully, and settled there, his weight grounding her. She rested her chin on his head. You're not just finding things, she said softly. You're reminding me. The puppy sighed. The sound was small. Content. The realization didn't land all at once. It unfolded gently. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't forcing anything open. He was pausing her. Interrupting the autopilot she'd lived on for so long. She had been moving forward without looking back. Packing memories away neatly. Labeling them later. Telling herself she'd deal with them when life slowed down. But life hadn't slowed. The puppy had. The evening light dimmed, and she turned on a lamp. The room filled with warmth again. She gathered the notebook, the frame, the fabrics he found earlier, and placed them together on the table. Not hidden. Not stored. Present. The puppy watched her the whole time. When she finished, she sat back down and looked at him. Really looked. You're teaching me to stop, she murmured. His tail moved once. Slow. Satisfied. She smiled. And for the first time since all this had started, she didn't wonder why he was doing it. She understood when. When she was ready. And she knew quietly, clearly. This was only the beginning of what he wanted her to remember. By the fourth day, she wasn't just watching him. She was listening. Not with her ears, but with the part of her that had learned, over time, to stay guarded. The part that usually stayed quiet. The puppy had a way of reaching it without force, without urgency. That morning, rain tapped gently against the windows. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just enough to soften the light and slow the world outside. The house felt wrapped in gray and warmth. She sat at the dining table with her tea, both hands around the mug. The puppy lay nearby, his body stretched out, completely at ease. His eyes were half closed, but she knew now that didn't mean he wasn't aware. He always was. She thought about the things he found so far. How none of them were random. How each one carried a piece of her she'd quietly set aside. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. After a while, she stood and walked toward the hallway closet. She hadn't planned to open it. Her feet just took her there. She paused with her hand on the knob, unsure why. The puppy stood up, walked over, sat beside her, waiting. She smiled to herself. "You already know, don't you?" She opened the door. The closet smelled like cardboard in time. Boxes stacked neatly. Labels written in her handwriting, clear, practical. Seasonal clothes. Old books. Things she told herself she'd sort through eventually. She knelt. The puppy stepped forward and nudged a box gently with his nose. Just once. She pulled it out. Inside were items she hadn't seen since before the move. A scarf folded carefully. A small journal. A card tucked between pages. Her breath slowed. She sat on the floor and lifted the card first. It was handwritten. Not recent. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. Simple. Kind. The kind of message people write when they don't know how to say goodbye properly. Her throat tightened. The puppy didn't touch the items this time. He simply sat beside her, close enough to feel, far enough to give space. She realized something then. He wasn't leading anymore. He was accompanying. She took her time reading the card, letting the memory come and go in its own way. When her eyes grew heavy, she set it down and rested her palm against the floor. The puppy leaned in and rested his head against her arm. Warm. Solid. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain continued outside. Soft. Steady. Like the world breathing along with her. When she finally stood up, she didn't feel drained. She felt lighter. That surprised her. Throughout the rest of the day, the puppy didn't bring her anything new. He followed her quietly as she cleaned, cooked, moved from room to room. His presence was constant, but unobtrusive. Like he knew the work had shifted. That evening, she sat on the couch with a blanket pulled over her legs. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows fogged and the air cool. The puppy climbed up beside her and curled into her side. She rested her hand on his chest, feeling the slow rhythm beneath her palm. "You're not just showing me things," she whispered. "You're teaching me how to sit with them." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She understood now, this wasn't about uncovering everything all at once. It was about pacing. About trust. About letting memories surface when they were ready to be held, not pushed away. The puppy shifted slightly, settling deeper against her. His breathing matched hers without effort. She smiled faintly. "You knew I wouldn't stop on my own," she murmured. Outside, the clouds began to thin, and a faint glow appeared along the horizon. The day was ending gently, without drama. She looked around the room, the objects on the table, the soft light, the small life leaning into her side. Understanding didn't arrive like a revelation. It arrived like acceptance. She didn't need to ask what would come next. She trusted that when the moment was right, the puppy would let her know. And for the first time in a long while, she was ready to listen. The fifth morning arrived quietly. The rain was gone, leaving the air clean and cool. Sunlight slipped through the curtains again, soft, careful, like it remembered how gently it needed to move in this house now. She woke before her alarm. Not suddenly. Not anxious. Just aware. The puppy lay beside the bed, curled into a small, warm shape. When she moved, his eyes opened immediately. Alert. Present. Watching her face before anything else. She smiled. "Good morning." His tail moved once against the blanket. Slow. Happy. She moved through her routine with ease. Brushed her teeth. Opened the windows. Let fresh air fill the rooms. The house felt lighter than it had days ago, like something had been loosened, untied. She poured water into the kettle and waited. The puppy didn't follow her right away this time. She noticed that too. She glanced toward the living room. He was standing near the bookshelf. Still. Focused. Her breath slowed. She didn't speak. Didn't move. She watched. He reached up carefully, placing his front paws against the lower shelf. His nose nudged something gently, testing. Then he adjusted, lifting an object with deliberate care. It slipped once. He steadied it. Then turned. Her heart began to beat just a little faster. He walked toward her slowly, the way he always did when something mattered. When he reached the kitchen, he placed the object at her feet and sat. Waiting. She looked down. It was a small wooden box. Smooth from handling. Edges softened by time. Her fingers hovered above it for a moment before she picked it up. The weight was familiar. Heavier than it looked. Her throat tightened. I didn't know this was there, she whispered. The puppy watched her face, not the box. She carried it to the table and sat down, setting it in front of her like something sacred. The morning light fell across the surface, highlighting small scratches, marks of use, not neglect. She opened it slowly. Inside were letters. Carefully folded. Tied with a thin piece of string. Her breath caught, not sharply, but deeply. Like her body had been waiting for this moment before she knew it. She untied the string. The first letter was written in handwriting she knew too well. Her hands trembled. She didn't read it right away. She just held it. The puppy stepped closer, resting his chin on her knee. His presence anchored her in the now, here, safe, steady. She unfolded the paper. The words were simple. Honest. Full of things people say when they don't know how much time they have left to say them. Her vision blurred. She didn't wipe her eyes this time. She let the tears come quietly, no sobbing, no collapse. Just a steady release, like water finally finding a way through. The puppy stayed still. Didn't lick her face. Didn't shift away. He understood, some moments don't need fixing. She read another letter. Then another. Each one softened something inside her. Not reopened wounds, healed ones that still carried warmth. By the time she finished, the kettle had cooled. The morning had moved on without her noticing. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. So this is what you wanted me to see, she murmured. The puppy exhaled softly, his body relaxing against her leg. It wasn't the letters alone. It was the timing. She realized then, this was the first time he'd brought her something she had actively avoided. Not misplaced. Not forgotten. Hidden. She had packed this box away on purpose. Told herself she wasn't ready. He had waited until she was. That afternoon, she didn't rush to put the box away. She left it on the table. Open. Visible. Real. The puppy followed her as she moved through the house, but he didn't search anymore. His job, for now, was done. She sat on the couch later, the box beside her, sunlight warming her shoulder. The puppy lay with his head in her lap, eyes half closed. You knew, she said quietly. You waited. His tail moved once. Slow. Sure. The clue wasn't about what he found. It was about how he found it. He didn't dig through everything. He didn't bring it immediately. He waited until her breathing had changed. Until her shoulders no longer stayed tight. Until she had learned to sit with what surfaced. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her hand. I thought healing meant pushing through, she whispered. But you're teaching me something else. The puppy shifted slightly, settling deeper. Healing could be slow. Gentle. Paced by trust. As evening approached, the light in the room softened again. She gathered the letters carefully and returned them to the box, but this time, she didn't close it completely. She left it slightly open. On purpose. The puppy watched her from the floor, eyes calm, expression peaceful. This wasn't the end. She could feel it. But it was the first clear sign. The first emotional clue. Not of loss, but of love that had never truly left. And whatever came next, she knew now. She wouldn't face it alone. That night, she dreamed. Not sharply. Not vividly. Just fragments. Soft impressions drifting in and out, voices without faces, laughter without sound. The kind of dream that doesn't wake you suddenly, but follows you into the morning like a feeling you can't quite place. She woke slowly. The room was dim, wrapped in early light. The puppy was already awake, sitting near the edge of the bed. Watching her. As if he'd been waiting. She smiled faintly. "You're up early." His tail tapped the mattress once. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and felt it immediately, the sense that something was closer now. Near the surface. Like a memory rising from deep water, still blurred but unmistakably there. She didn't rush. She'd learned better. In the kitchen, she made breakfast quietly. No radio. No phone. Just the sounds of morning, the kettle, the pan, the soft hum of the house waking up. The puppy stayed nearby, but he didn't search. Not yet. After she ate, she carried her mug to the living room and sat by the window. Outside, the day was clear and pale. Birds moved between branches, unbothered by the world. She watched them for a while. Then she felt it again. That subtle shift. The puppy stood. Walked not toward the shelves this time, but toward her. He stopped a few feet away and sat, facing her directly. His posture was different, more still than usual. More attentive. She lowered her mug. "What is it?" He didn't move. Just looked at her. She frowned slightly, not confused, but curious. "You're not bringing me anything?" The puppy tilted his head. Then turned. And walked toward the hallway door. She followed. Not because she expected something, but because she trusted him now. He stopped in front of the spare room. The one she rarely entered. The door was closed. She hadn't thought about that room in days. Maybe longer. It had become part of the house she didn't engage with, kept clean, kept quiet, kept untouched. The puppy sat in front of the door. Waiting. Her chest tightened, not painfully, just noticeably. "You want me to go in there?" she asked softly. His tail moved once. She reached for the knob and hesitated. The moment stretched. Then she opened the door. The room smelled faintly of dust and old fabric. Light filtered in through a single window, illuminating shapes that felt distant and familiar all at once. Boxes lined the wall. A small desk. A chair pushed in neatly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing hidden in plain sight. She stepped inside. The puppy followed, padding quietly behind her. He walked straight to the desk and stopped. Saturday. She swallowed. "I haven't opened that in a while," she said, more to herself than to him. She pulled the chair out and sat. Her fingers rested on the desk's surface, tracing a faint scratch she remembered making years ago. A time when she'd sat here often. Writing. Thinking. Hoping. She opened the drawer. Inside were loose pages. A pen. An envelope. Her heart slowed. This wasn't forgotten. This was unfinished. She lifted the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Just folded shut, as if she'd planned to come back to it. She opened it. Inside was a letter. Unsent. Her breath caught, not with pain, but recognition. She remembered this now. The night she'd written it. The way her hand had cramped halfway through. The moment she'd stopped, unsure if words could ever be enough. She sat back, the letter resting in her hands. The puppy lay down at her feet, his head on his paws, eyes on her face. She read. Slowly. The words were careful. Honest. Vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be anymore. She could hear her younger voice between the lines, hopeful, afraid, sincere. She hadn't sent it because she was scared. Not of rejection. Of finality. If she sent it, something would end. She set the letter down and closed her eyes. The memory surfaced fully now, not rushing, not overwhelming. Just present. She took a deep breath. When she opened her eyes, the room looked different. Warmer. Less distant. You brought me here, she whispered. The puppy lifted his head slightly. She smiled through the heaviness in her chest. You didn't bring me anything this time. His tail tapped the floor once. She understood. Some things couldn't be carried in a mouth. Some things had to be faced. She stayed in the room for a long time. Sitting. Remembering. Letting the past exist without pushing it away or pulling it closer than it wanted to be. When she finally stood, she folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Not hidden. Not abandoned. Just acknowledged. She closed the drawer and rested her hand on the desk one last time. Thank you, she said quietly. The puppy stood and walked to her side, brushing against her leg as they left the room together. She closed the door, but not tightly. Later that evening, as the light faded and the house settled again, she realized something important. The puppy wasn't guiding her toward sadness. He was guiding her toward completeness. Toward the parts of herself she'd left behind, not because they were broken, but because she hadn't known how to carry them forward. Now she did. Because she wasn't carrying them alone. And the memory that had begun to surface was no longer something to fear. The seventh day felt different from the moment it began. Not heavier. Not lighter. Clearer. She noticed it while standing at the window, watching morning light stretch across the street. The world looked the same, but her place inside it felt steadier. As if something inside her had finally settled into alignment. The puppy sat behind her, quiet as always. Waiting. She turned and smiled. You're still watching me. His ears lifted slightly. She made breakfast slowly, moving with intention now, not because she was afraid of missing something, but because she trusted the pace. When she finished, she sat on the floor instead of the chair. The puppy came immediately. Curled beside her. For the first time since all this began. He didn't move afterward. No searching. No retrieving. Just stillness. She frowned slightly. Is that it? He shifted closer. She laughed under her breath. You've been so busy bringing things to me. I thought there would be more. The puppy rested his chin on her thigh. And suddenly, she understood. The truth didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived as a feeling. He hadn't been bringing her objects. He'd been bringing her moments. Moments she had skipped. Moments she had postponed. Moments she told herself she'd deal with someday. The puppy hadn't chosen items randomly. Each one had been tied to a part of her she had paused, intentionally or not. Memories that hadn't been painful enough to demand attention, but meaningful enough to deserve it. She had mistaken that quiet ache for something to avoid. He hadn't. You weren't trying to remind me of what I lost, she whispered. You were showing me what stayed. The puppy's breathing deepened. Slow. Content. She leaned back on her hands, letting the realization settle fully. This wasn't about grief. Or sadness. Or even healing in the way she'd always imagined it. It was about continuity. About understanding that the past wasn't something she had to seal away to keep moving forward. It could walk beside her. Just like he did. Later that afternoon, she decided to leave the house for the first time in days, not to escape the quiet, but to bring it with her. She clipped the leash onto the puppy's collar, and he stood patiently, tail low, eyes bright. Outside, the air was warm and open. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, passing familiar houses and unfamiliar faces. The puppy didn't pull. Didn't rush ahead. He stayed close to her side, matching her pace exactly. She noticed how people looked at him. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he was present. Attentive. Grounded. At the park, she sat on a bench while he explored nearby, never straying far. She watched him stop near a tree, sniff the ground, then sit quietly, no distraction, no urgency. Just awareness. She smiled. "You've been like this the whole time," she said softly. "I just didn't see it." The puppy returned to her and sat at her feet. Waiting. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth beneath her fingers. "You didn't come to fill something empty." He leaned into her touch. "You came to keep me connected." The truth unfolded gently now. He wasn't sensing loss. He was sensing her. Her breathing. Her posture. The way she lingered near certain places. The way her hands hesitated before opening certain boxes. He responded not to the objects, but to the emotion surrounding them. And he waited. Always waited. Until she was ready. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. She stood and brushed dirt from her jeans, the puppy rising beside her without command. On the walk home, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Trust. Not just in him, but in herself. Back inside the house, she placed the objects he'd brought her earlier back where they belonged, not hidden, not displayed. Integrated. The notebook went into the drawer she used daily. The fabrics folded neatly on a shelf she passed often. The letters returned to their box, but kept within reach. The puppy watched from the doorway. No reaction. No concern. His work wasn't about control. It was about awareness. That evening, as she turned off the lights and settled onto the couch, the puppy curled up beside her, resting his head against her side. "You don't need to bring me anything else," she murmured. "I get it now." His tail moved once. Satisfied. The truth behind his actions wasn't mysterious anymore. It was beautiful in its simplicity. He had sensed a human moving too fast through her own life. And he had gently, lovingly, asked her to slow down. Not by stopping her, but by walking with her. And in that quiet companionship, she found exactly what she hadn't known she was missing. The house felt different in the mornings now. Not quieter. Not louder. Balanced. She noticed it as she stood in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter, touching the edges of familiar things. Nothing had changed about the space itself, yet everything felt more intentional. The puppy sat near her feet, watching. Not waiting for a cue. Just present. She poured coffee and carried the mug to the living room, settling into her usual spot on the couch. The objects he'd helped her rediscover were part of the room now, not arranged like a display, not hidden away. They simply belonged. Just like the memories attached to them. The puppy climbed up beside her and curled against her leg, his weight warm and grounding. She rested her hand on his back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You did all that," she murmured. Without saying a word. He shifted slightly, comfortable. The days that followed didn't bring new discoveries. No more objects carefully placed at her feet. No quiet invitations to open drawers or closets. Instead, something subtler happened. She began to notice herself. The way she paused before rushing into tasks. The way she let moments finish before moving on. The way she sat with feelings instead of filing them away. The puppy didn't guide her anymore. He mirrored her. When she slowed, he stayed close. When she rested, he rested. When she laughed softly, unexpectedly, his tail followed. One afternoon, she sat on the floor sorting through old photographs. Not because she felt compelled to, but because she wanted to. The puppy lay nearby, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. She smiled as she worked. No heaviness. Just warmth. Later, as evening approached, she took him outside again. The sky was wide and pale, the air calm. They walked without destination, letting the neighborhood unfold around them. At one point, she stopped. The puppy stopped too. She looked down at him and laughed quietly. "You're always right here." He looked up at her, eyes steady. She realized then he hadn't changed her life in a dramatic way. He hadn't arrived to fix something broken. He had arrived to notice something overlooked. To reflect back what she needed most, presence. They returned home as the light softened. Inside, she lit a lamp and settled onto the couch. The puppy climbed up beside her, curling into a familiar shape. "You know," she said softly, "I thought healing was supposed to feel big." The puppy's breathing stayed slow and even. "I thought it would come with answers. Or closure. Or some clear moment where everything made sense." She rested her head back and closed her eyes. "But this..." She exhaled slowly. "This is quieter than I expected." The puppy pressed closer, his warmth steady against her side. Healing hadn't arrived with certainty. It had arrived with companionship. With patience. With a small life that noticed when her shoulders tightened. When her breath shortened. When her attention drifted too far from herself. He hadn't demanded change. He had offered rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern held. She moved through her life more gently now. Not cautiously, intentionally. And the puppy grew. His steps steadied. His body filled out. But his awareness never faded. Sometimes, she caught him watching her from across the room, not because he needed something, but because he cared. One evening, she sat on the floor and pulled him into a loose embrace. He rested his head against her chest, completely trusting. "You chose me too, didn't you?" she whispered. His tail moved once. Slow. Certain. She understood now, some connections don't arrive loudly. They don't announce their purpose. They simply show up. And stay. The puppy hadn't brought her answers. He had brought her back to herself. As the night settled in and the house grew quiet, she turned off the lights and stood. The puppy followed her down the hallway, matching her pace as he always did. Before turning in, she paused and looked around the living room one last time. At the objects. The light. The stillness. Everything felt whole. Not because the past had been resolved, but because it had been welcomed. She reached down and scratched the puppy behind the ears. "Thank you," she said softly. He leaned into her hand. And together, they walked into the quiet. Not chasing meaning. Not carrying weight. Just sharing it.